Today's lesson is eco-friendly fabric. Too good to be true? Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're talking about fabric or cloth or material that is used to make clothes. And you may have heard it in the news that clothing can be harmful to the environment, especially with fast fashion. So we've got somebody in Japan coming up with something called modal fabric that will try to address this problem.
Right. So our clothing can be made from various types of fabric. For instance, my favorite is cotton because cotton fabric is comfortable. It absorbs humidity, so when you sweat, it gets absorbed into the fabric. But there are other different types of fabric that are more eco-friendly because cotton may not be very eco-friendly. From what I've heard, it consumes a lot of water to grow cotton as a plant. But there are other types of fabric that are more eco-friendly. So eco-friendly here means friendly to the environment or something that doesn't damage the environment or the ecosystem.
Right. And sometimes, of course, when we present to people a certain situation or a certain thing and we describe it in very positive ways, they might be asking, is that too good to be true? It just sounds like an excellent idea. And that's what we're going to talk about today concerning modal fabric. It does sound too good to be true, but it does have pros and cons, which we'll discuss as our lesson continues. So let's dive right in, everybody. Let's listen to the first part and find out all about modal fabric.
Eco-friendly fabric. Too good to be true? Increasingly, fashion consumers are no longer concerned only with how good their clothes look. They also want to know whether or not their clothes are ethical. To please this new wave of ethical shoppers, fashion brands are eager to use fabrics that can be marketed as eco-friendly. Modal fabric, a plant-based fabric invented in Japan, is among the most famous of such fabrics. But what exactly is modal? And is it really as eco-friendly as it's cracked up to be?
大家好，我们来介绍标题中的名词 fabric。它的意思是织物、布料或是构造。例如 I like soft fabrics because they are really comfortable to wear. 我喜欢柔软的织物，因为它们穿起来很舒服。再来，我们看到名词 consumer， 它的意思是消费者或是顾客。例如If you want more consumers to buy your product, you may have to change a few things. 如果你想要更多消费者买你的产品，你可能要做一些改变。又或者说 Consumers often demand high quality and low prices. 消费者经常要求品质高又低价格。
Diving into the first part of today's lesson, the first sentence says, Increasingly, fashion consumers are no longer concerned only with how good their clothes look. So this sentence assumes that in the past, fashion consumers were primarily concerned with how good they looked in the clothing that they bought. But these days, that's no longer the main concern or the most important thing. Increasingly, fashion consumers, or people who buy clothing, who are interested in fashion, they care about other things as well. So here the word consumer means someone who buys goods or services.
Exactly. And of course, you still want to look your best. You want to look highly spiffy in some fashionable clothing. But of course, lots of people these days are concerned about what the clothing is doing to the environment. And they also want to know whether or not their clothes are ethical. Ethical just means something that has to do with right and wrong. Is it right to wear this kind of clothing or is it wrong? Of course, if we talk about ethics, we're talking about general rules you need to use to conduct yourself in business. Like if you're a lawyer or something and then you tell your client some information you're not supposed to tell them about, then you could be described as being unethical.
Right, and some other people think that it's not ethical or unethical to keep animals in zoos. So they say that zoos are not ethical.
And moral is a similar word, but here we're going to use the word ethical, whether or not the clothes are good for the environment And moving on to the next sentence here, it says, to please this new wave of ethical shoppers, fashion brands are eager to use fabrics that can be marketed as eco-friendly. So yes, we have this new wave, this trend of ethical shoppers. We are getting more and more of those kinds of consumers. So, of course, the fashion brands need to respond to this. They are eager to use fabrics or kinds of material or cloth that can be marketed as eco-friendly. Now, if you market something, of course, you present it to the market in order to try to sell it. You do research into the market and you find out if your product is going to sell or not. So they're marketing this fabric, they're presenting it, they're advertising it as being eco-friendly or good for the environment.
That's right. So in this particular case, modal fabric, a plant-based fabric invented in Japan, is among the most famous of such fabrics. So when we say such fabrics, we're talking about fabrics that can be marketed as eco-friendly. And in this particular case, such a fabric is modal fabric. And what is modal fabric? It's a plant-based fabric that was invented in Japan. So something that is plant-based is made with plants. It normally doesn't contain any animal products. So some people say that they follow a plant-based diet, or they could also say they follow a vegan diet, which is plant-based. It doesn't contain any animal products.
Exactly, and we're calling this kind of fabric modal fabric. Modal can mean quite a few things. When I see the word modal, of course, I think of modes in music. Instead of using the major scale or the minor scale, you can use modes like the Dorian mode or the Lydian mode, etc. But here we're just calling it modal fabric, and again, it's based on plants, and plants are biodegradable, so that must be good for the environment. But what exactly is modal, and is it really as eco-friendly as it's cracked up to be? That's an interesting phrase there, to be cracked up to be, and that's often used in the negative. I could say that, well, it's just not as good as people think it is. It's not all that it's cracked up to be. You can express it that way.
Right. So you could say that the expression cracked up to be is the same as said to be. So I could also say this shampoo isn't as good as people say that it is, or that it's said to be, or this shampoo isn't as good as it's cracked up to be.
Right, so people, of course, say it's really good, but then you find out it isn't, so then you can say, well, it's not as good as people say. It's not all that it's cracked up to be. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's continue to talk about modal fabric in part 2.
Modal is made from the wood of beech trees. First, the trees are cut into small chips, and their cellulose, a natural material that makes up the cell walls of plants, is removed. The cellulose is then processed with chemicals into fibers, which are then woven together to make the fabric.
第二部分我们看到名词 chip， 这个字的意思是碎片、碎块、碎屑，但也可以是晶片的意思。例如 Sandy bought a box of chocolate chip cookies at the supermarket. Sandy 在超市买了一盒巧克力碎片饼干。或是 To get the computer to work, one of its chips will have to be replaced. 需要更换其中一枚晶片，才能让那台电脑正常运作。下一个我们看到单字 fiber， 它是名词，指的是植物或是人造物的纤维或是纤维物质。例如 Fruits and vegetables contain lots of fiber, and they can bring a lot of benefits to your health. 水果和蔬菜中富含许多植物纤维，而它们会对你的健康带来许多好处。或是 Whole grain bread, beans, and nuts are excellent sources of fiber. 全麦面包、豆类和坚果是很好的纤维来源。
So in the last part, we asked the question, what is modal fabric? Well, modal is made from the wood of beech trees. Now, beech is a type of tree that's normally found in the northern hemisphere, and we have beech trees as well in Taiwan, so they're quite commonly found in different countries. Now, first, the trees are cut into small chips, and their cellulose, a natural material that makes up the cell walls of plants, is removed.
Okay, so again, this fabric comes from beech trees. Remember, that's not the beach where you go play in the sand and swim in the ocean. It's spelled differently, B-E-E-C-H. And yes, indeed, they use the wood from a beech tree. And then the trees are cut into small chips. Chips are small parts of something that are chipped off or cut off, like potato chips. Those are snacks that Americans like to eat. And then we've got cellulose, and that's a natural material that makes up the cell walls of plants. It's a natural material, it's not artificial, and it makes up the walls of cells in plants. And the cellulose is then processed with chemicals into fibers, and then those fibers are woven together to make the fabric. So a fiber is kind of like a thread-like substance. It does make up a certain portion of our diet. We need to have a certain amount of fiber in our diet, and I understand that it's not really digestible. It kind of goes straight through you, but it's still important to have a certain amount of fiber in your diet.
Right. It's good for you because it helps digestion, and usually plants and leafy greens and fruits have a lot of fiber in them.
Should mention also that when we talk about it as a part of your diet, we tend to use it in the non-count form. How much fiber do you get in your diet? But here we're counting it. We've got these fibers because they are little pieces of thread or string, and they're very, very small, but they're strong, and you can weave them together to make the fabric. And once you have the fabric and the thread, you can start making it into clothing. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Now it's time for us to move on to the third and final part. We will listen to it first.
In terms of attributes, modal certainly seems to have it all. It stretches well, it's light but also very strong. It doesn't shrink or wrinkle easily, and it doesn't lose its color. It's often used instead of cotton or silk to make all sorts of clothing, including underwear, exercise gear, and t-shirts.
第三部分我们看到名词 attribute， 指的是属性、特性或是特质。例如 Yana's best attribute was her willingness to work hard. Yana 最棒的特性就是她肯努力工作。又或者说 Eric's blue eyes are his most noticeable physical attribute. Eric 的蓝色眼睛是他最醒目的外观特质。另外，这个字也可以当作动词使用，念作 attribute， 指的是把点点点归因于。例如 Jane attributes her success to being in the right place at the right time. Jane 把自己的成功归因于天时地利。再举一个例子 The success of the film is attributed to the talented actors. 这部片的成功归因于才华洋溢的演员。再来我们看到动词 wrinkle， 指的是起皱纹或是使发皱。例如 Staying out in the sun too long can cause your skin to wrinkle. 在阳光下待太久可能会导致你的皮肤起皱纹。又或者说 The shirt got wrinkled in my suitcase, so I need to iron it. 这件衬衫在我的行李箱里发皱了，所以我必须把它烫平。最后我们看到单字 gear， 它是名词，指的是特定活动的服装、装备或是用具。举例来说 You need to wear protective gear when you enter the lab. 你进入实验室时应穿着防护服装。
So now we know a little bit about how modal clothing is made. Now, what is modal clothing like on your skin when you wear it? Well, in terms of attributes, modal certainly seems to have it all. So we're talking about the attributes of modal clothes or this type of fabric. An attribute is a quality or a feature that something has or somebody has. You can say that John has many positive attributes. He's friendly, he's generous, he's always on time. And here, modal also has a lot of positive attributes.
Right. Attributes, of course, are qualities. And in this particular case, though, it is very similar to the verb form attribute, which is a little different in meaning. I could say, for example, John attributes his success to working hard. That has to do with the cause of something, but here as a noun, attributes, that just refers to the qualities that it has. And in terms of attributes, if we're going to talk about its qualities or characteristics, well, it seems to have it all. It can do lots of different things. Let's look at the next sentence here. It says, it's light, but also very strong. It doesn't shrink or wrinkle easily, and it doesn't lose its color. So that's very nice. Of course, if we want to wear clothing, we want the clothing to be light and not heavy, but it's still very strong, even though it's very light. And also, it doesn't shrink. That is a problem when you have clothing like cotton or wool, and if you put those items in a dryer, the hot air will make them smaller, and you won't be able to wear those clothing items anymore. And also, if clothing wrinkles, then it has all those folds and lines that are unattractive.
Right, and it stretches well too. That means when you wear it and if you're moving around, you're not going to feel constrained by the fabric. The fabric will stretch so that it moves along with you. And this type of fabric is often used instead of cotton or silk to make all sorts of clothing. So it can substitute other types of fabric like cotton or silk, which are also natural fabrics. And this type of fabric, modal, can be used to make underwear, exercise gear, and t-shirts. So seeing that it stretches well, it makes sense that it can be used to make exercise gear. So gear is another word for equipment or things that you would use for a particular purpose. For instance, you can say camping gear or hiking gear, which means all of the stuff, the clothing, things that you would wear and use when you go camping or when you go hiking.
Right, and when you use this word to refer to equipment, the things that you need to carry out a certain kind of activity, then this is a non-count noun. How much gear do we need for our camping trip in the mountains? It can be countable in a different context, like if you ride a bicycle or a motorcycle, it will have a certain number of gears, and in that particular case, the word gear can be countable. My bicycle has 18 gears, 2 in the front and 9 in the back, although I'm not going to use all the gears, of course, but that would be a countable noun. But again, here, the word gear is non-countable. It's referring to all the equipment that you need for a certain type of activity. Also, note that the word equipment itself is non-count. Please do not add an S to that word. And yes, indeed, you can use this particular fabric to make underwear, exercise gear, and t-shirts. So yes, it can be used to make shorts that can be very cool and they can stretch around and they won't lose their color. And that seems to be some great advantages. Isn't that so?
It seems like it. So let's see what else we can find out about modal and whether it is really truly eco-friendly, because often companies make these claims because that's their marketing strategy. But if you dig deeper and you do some research, you may find that it really is just a marketing strategy and it isn't that eco-friendly after all.
Well, so far, modal fabric sounds pretty cool, but next time, of course, we'll probably talk about some of the disadvantages of modal clothing, and please join us then. But right now, we're going to take a time out and listen to Hanny, our beloved Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分有提到，莫代尔布料是由日本发明，是一种以植物为主的布料。那么文中它用到 a plant-based fabric 来表达说以植物为主的布料，其中的 plant-based 可以形容以植物为主或是以植物为基底的。好，那这边我们就来学习复合形容词用名词连字号 based 构成的这种用法。好 ，base base 当动词，它可以表达设基地或是立基于什么什么，把什么什么建立在基础上。那么用名词连字号 based 所组成的复合形容词，可以用来表达以什么为基底的，以什么为主要成分或特征的，或者是可以表达将总部设在什么什么的。像我们说 a plant-based diet 就是植物性饮食，以植物为主的那种饮食方式。A milk-based product 以牛奶为基底的产品。A London-based company 则是表达总部在伦敦的公司，或者是 a tourism-based economy 就是以观光业为主的经济。好，再来我们看到这个课文第3部分的第一句，他说就其特性而言，莫代尔布料似乎具备各种优点。那文中他用到 in terms of attributes 来表达就特性而言。好，我们在别课有介绍到 in terms of 是表达就什么而言，从什么方面来看。那至于 attribute 在这边当名词是指特性，注意一下它当动词则是念 attribute。好，那我们来学习这个字的字首字根。Tribute 它本身当作单字呢，有贡品啊、贡献、致敬、敬意的意思。那它作为字根的话，则有那种给予、分配的意思。好，我们看到 attribute 这个单字，它的字首 at 来自 ad 表示朝向， tribute 表示给予分配。当我们朝着某人或某事物把功劳或过错分给他，可以去联想到说 attribute 当动词有归因于或是归咎于点点点的意思。它也可以表达出将某种特质归属于某人或某事物的意思。好，那在我们文中呢，它则是当名词Attribute 是表达属性、特性或特质。好，那这边也补充几个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 contribute， 它的字首 con 表示一起， tribute 表示贡献、给予。那么一起贡献、给予应该可以联想到 contribute， 它有捐献啊、做出贡献或是为什么什么贡献的意思。第二个补充的是 distribute， 它的字首 dis 表示个别分开，那么 tribute 表示分配、给予。当我们个别分配物品一个一个给，应该就不难联想到 distribute 它有分配分发的意思。好，第三个补充的是 retribution， 那么字首 re 表示往回， tribut 这部分是来自 tribute 表示分配给予，那么 ion 是名词字尾，我们就可以用给予相对应的回报、惩处去联想到 retribution 它有报应、严惩的意思。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾这些单字吧。
Fabric. Robin carefully examined the fabric of the dress before deciding to buy it. Consumer. The new advertisements aim to attract more consumers to the brand. Ethical. The politicians' business activities raised a number of ethical concerns. Chip. A small chip broke off of the vase when Jeff dropped it on the floor. Fiber. Silk is made from natural fibers produced by silkworms. Attribute. Patience is an important attribute for a teacher to have when working with students. Gear. Donna put on her gear, including her boots, backpack, and hat, before starting her hike.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Helen.
I am Roger.
See you next time.